welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I'm joined by all of my awesome co-hosts this week.
Nate Heininger.
Lauren Ash.
Romantically yours, Shane Kelly.
And this week, we are talking about Anodyne 2, Return to Dust. And this is the sequel to a game that we previously covered on the show, pretty recently, actually. In episode 177, we talked about the first Anodyne, which we'd been waiting on for quite a while, but it had come out fairly recently at that time on Switch, which gave us the boot in the butt that we needed to get around to covering Anodyne, a game that came out, I think, in 2013. And it's from the original game, and this one are both from the duo Analgesic Games, which is the combo of developers Sean Con-Tanny, I hope I pronounced that right, and Marina Kitaka.
So a game company called Painkiller and a game called Without Pain. Great.
Yes, yeah. And so Anodyne 1 was a project that they put together when they were in college together, essentially, and it was put together over a fairly short period of time, and it's this very cool Zelda-like. It's a top-down 2D Zelda-like that has a very weird, surreal feel that is deliberately referential of, but also just sort of inspired by the vague tone of, Link's Awakening, and also by other sort of psychological kind of stuff. We talked quite a bit about Anodyne 1 in episodes 177, so I won't repeat a ton of what we said there, but does anybody have anything they want to say about Anodyne 1 or Analgesic Games in general?
A couple things that this game shares in CNA are, I wouldn't say an aversion to violence per se, there's still combat, but in Anodyne 1 you are armed with a broom, and that is your main weapon. And also you are collecting cards, so it is not a deck builder by any stretch of the imagination, but the rewards you get are cards. They're little images that go in your inventory. So they've got this, kind of in-game currency of cards to unlock gates, cards to unlock next stages of the game. Some of that stuff creeps into Anodyne 2. And Nate, I believe you played Even the Ocean, right?
Correct. And it was interesting to me because I made it about a half an hour into this game before I was like, this writing reminds me of Even the Ocean, which if you've played any of their games, they have a very distinct writing style. And I did not play Anodyne 1, and so I did not have that immediate connection. But it was like I was getting heavy Even the Ocean vibes. So then, of course, come to find out they had made both games, and it just, I think it goes to show, like, they've made several games now, and they're very wildly different in genre and scope and like what they're trying to accomplish, but they definitely have almost like an auteur feel. I could tell that this was made by them, even though it is entirely unlike Even the Ocean. Even the Ocean is a side-scrolling platformer, like puzzle platformer with some overworld mechanics, completely unlike this game.
Yeah, this game, obviously it's the sequel to Anodyne, which is probably their most popular and famous game, but it's also a very different game from that. They share a lot of common elements, but they kind of describe the relationship between Anodyne 1 and Anodyne 2 as like the relationship between the various Final Fantasy games. There are echoes of Anodyne 1 in Anodyne 2, many things that are part of that Anodyne 1 sort of structure are either referenced here or explicitly part of the structure of this game too, but they take place in different worlds. They involve different sets of characters. There's no true through line between the games, except in ways that maybe there are things in Anodyne 2 that kind of nod at or hint at things from Anodyne 1, so that you can kind of, if you did play Anodyne 1, you'll, enjoy the reference basically, but you're not required to play these in order. There's not something about Anodyne 2 that really builds on Anodyne 1, except that they're just part of the same, series.
Yeah, and they actually tell you adorably about this when you start the game for the first time. There's a screen with like basically a letter from the developers to the player.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That's right.
Saying straight up like, hey, this is a spiritual successor to Anodyne 1, and you don't have to have played it before. Thank you for playing. We really appreciate you buying our game. It's adorable. I love it.
I actually think that personal outreach to the player and like trying to make things very inviting is a big through line in the whole design, but you actually see it a lot right up front from the menu. Like, this is a game that has a menu item like on the opening screen that invites you to join their Discord and like talk to them. So this is a game that has, I guess not every big AAA game actually could do that. The Discord would erupt into absolute garbage, but I think that's a really neat aspect of this game. Like, they seem to really be speaking directly to the player about it, saying like, here's what this game is. We want to welcome you into it.
Yeah, that's really true. And also from that main menu, they've got links directly to their incredibly beautiful manual. And the manual is another way that they're like speaking directly to the player with lots of notes, signed in their names and written in the first person by the developers, kind of describing their work to you. So this does feel like, Artoured is kind of a great term for it here. They're clearly very comfortable with kind of describing this as their work and putting themselves into it and even sort of signing their name on it in very obvious ways.
Shane, you mentioned a garbage Discord. You know what is not a garbage Discord?
The short game Discord?
Our Discord. Shout out to all the people that are chatting us up in our Discord.
Shout out.
Hey,
actually,
everybody.
I've been trying to get in the rhythm of talking about our Patreon at the start and end of every episode, and I've still not quite made that, internal yet. So apologies, listener, for sticking this in where it doesn't belong. But hey, did you know that this podcast is supported exclusively by our listeners on Patreon? And for as little as $1 a month, you can support the show, which we deeply appreciate. But you can also join our Discord, which is a great way to chat with us about the games that you're playing, about the games that we're playing, recommend games to the show. And we have nice off-topic channels as well, where we're talking about things like long games that we're playing and other random stuff. And maybe you'll be interested in this. As a sort of pseudo sequel to Bird Week, we're currently planning a Crab Week episode in our Discord. So if you have a favorite video game crab, we want to hear about it. Come chat with us about all of the favorite crabs of all of video games in our Discord right now.
So currently happening on the Anodyne 2 Discord is a conversation about the Saturn, which I never played because my parents did not believe in video games. Suck it, parents. I have a podcast now.
Yeah.
But I'll say, to bring it back on topic, that all of that
Laura.
conversation about the Saturn and 3D worlds and nostalgic made me realize that even if you don't have that pull, there's still other things you'll be nostalgic for. Raygan mentioned that manual. It is wonderful to put you in that old school mindset to just look at what looks like a Game Boy manual, and then you start flipping through it and it gives you all the guides, but it's for a modern game. So even if you don't have you don't look at this art style and go, yes, this is me. For me, my way in was, I looked at all the throwback stuff, and I thought, some people have compared it to David Lynch. To me, it's more like Spike Jonze, like the guy who did Being John Malkovich or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It's as if he made a Zelda game.
Yeah.
And all that consummate weirdness. And so I really enjoyed having that kind of surreal quality, but it was surreal for a purpose. It's surreal for a story. So if you like that kind of weird combo, that's the feeling I got. And I got a tiny bit of that DNA in Anodyne 1, but it comes through much, much, much more in this one.
That's really true. So we should start talking a little more specifically about Anodyne 2. If you played Anodyne 1, it was that 2D top-down Zelda-like, and that is here, but it is now a much smaller part of the game because this game adds on a full 3D world. And so the sort of gimmick of this game is that you are playing as, and we'll talk about the story of the game in a moment. This is a lot more story than Anodyne 1 as well. But you're playing as the nano cleaner, Nova, whose special power is that she's going around to various people in the world of the game and kind of doing a dive inside of them by shrinking to nano scale and going inside of them to clean their minds of nano dust, which is a sort of pollutant that causes mental
Sickness.
It kind of implies that the beings of this world are immortal, and this sickness like doesn't kill them but makes them like inoperable, basically. So I was thinking of like Grim Fandango, you know, how it would get bloomed or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It sounds awful.
It does, and so that's sort of the whole gimmick of the game is that you've got this fairly large, I wouldn't quite call it an open world, but by comparison to something like Anodyne 1, like a truly large world to explore, all in 3D. And the 3D is, you know, the 2D stuff has still the sort of SNES or thereabouts style of graphics from Anodyne 1, very similar to Anodyne 1. But so the 3D is similarly retro, but in a way that I think is really charming. And so it's got this very early, low poly, low res texture 3D look that looks pitch perfect, like 3D worlds from, like Laura was saying, the Sega Saturn. Or Nate, you were saying this reminded you a lot of like early MMOs.
Yeah, so a lot of my touch on for that era of games is MMOs. So it definitely reminded me of late EverQuest and early World of Warcraft. But I think the Saturn makes a lot of sense too. And I don't know if you said it exactly, like so the 3D world, it's like the overworld, and then the gimmick is that when you go into the mind of the thing you're going to clean, that's when it enters into the 2D world.
Yeah, so essentially you're going into characters, and the characters in the 3D world are like the dungeons in a Zelda game. Each person kind of contains their own little mini world, which is sort of like the dungeon to solve.
It's very Psychonauts.
Yeah, actually, extremely Psychonauts.
Oh my gosh, yeah. This game might as well be Psychonauts.
I think that's a bit of an overstatement, but sure.
Yeah, Psychonauts is still a 3D environment when you go inside. This one, you're suddenly in a 2D world.
Yeah, I was thinking about it because I was thinking they must have, like, you know, like when you're designing a game, like what was the idea? And it was like, okay, we want to do a game that is both 2D and 3D, so we have to have a reason why you would switch between the two. And I have to imagine that's where this like idea about going into someone's mind and cleaning it, because it kind of feels right. You're out in a big world. Running around, you can be a car, which is a really goofy thing.
Okay, I want to talk about that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I know. So I know that that was like you
I
can't
love
just
that.
say that. You can't just say that and move on. I definitely knew that, but it made a lot of sense to me that like so they wanted like a big world and a little world, right? So that big world is 3D, little world is 2D. So why not have it be outside of people's minds is 3D, inside of people's minds is 2D. And I think it's a really smart, and it's sort of like we talk a lot about the show where a game mechanic fuels the story or fuels like the idea, and they kind of like go hand in hand. And I thought this was a really cool example of that, because like it feels right that you jump into their mind. No, it's 2D. When you're done with it, you're back into the real world and it's 3D.
So, and the other thing that I think is a big distinction between the first Anodyne and this game is that it goes much, it has a lot more of, I guess, a more obvious story to it. The first Anodyne, the story was told in a very sort of surreal way. It was mostly it felt as if what you were seeing was sort of a representation of, or not representation, but like a surreal stand-in for psychological or philosophical concepts. It felt very much like you were exploring the psyche of a person, and not seeing, it was all figurative. You weren't seeing the reality of what was going on. You were seeing exclusively sort of the interior of someone's mind in a way that was very, not representational, if that makes sense.
It was metaphorical.
Thank you.
A lot of things were stand-ins for real life things, or you'd go into someone's mind and you would see, things on fire and they'd be angry. And some of that DNA does come forward in this game.
Yeah, but it especially comes forward in the sort of mental space of the characters. It's almost as if all of Anodyne 1 could theoretically be the interior space on a much larger scale, because that was a full game, whereas the dungeons, so to speak, here are actually fairly modest in size. But like it feels a bit as if not just from the art style, that the style of Anodyne 1 is clearly represented in the moments when you go inside someone's mind and you're exploring their psyche. Whereas the outer world of Anodyne, it's still weird, it's still surreal, but it's also very consistent. It has a story that has a through line, characters, A to B to C. It's much more inherently consistent than Anodyne was, and I think that's really what the series needed. It's still got that sort of very sort of lynchy, surreality to it, full of surprises and odd characters with motivations that are unclear, but it feels like a world in a way that I didn't really think that Anodyne 1 kind of did.
To me, the map of Anodyne 1 was really tying each element, each dungeon to the environment. Swamplands had things that were boggy. Haunted places had ghosts. But it was environmental. This one, instead of exploring areas like a forest or a swamp, you're exploring people.
Yeah.
Or actually really weird beings. They're not even people, and they're sentient, clearly, but really weird, like rock things or bird things or worm things. That's who you're exploring. So it's not so much worried about exploring a place, but exploring someone's current therapy needs.
Their headspace, basically.
Therapist.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the world of the game because it's so good.
Yeah. So in this game, you are sort of you're a creature or a being who has been created for this one purpose and this one purpose alone of going into people's minds and bodies and curing them of the disease of this dust. And you are created by you got two moms, because that's a very normal family is what I would say about this. And so you get sent out from an egg, in which you have to hatch out of your egg by talking to various egg yolks who live in there with you. And yolk robes, and you are curing them of their dust infections. And then you are talking to, I want to say it was a giant lizard who controls some sort of ley line of power, which you must ride out of your egg, which is how normal things hatch. There's a very strange world. Did I miss anything so far?
Not exactly. Once you've hatched, you talk to your two mommies who are
Yes,
Psalmist.
you're in the center. So who are they again? Sorry.
Yes, so there's your two mommies, C Psalmist, that's Psalmist, and then there's Palisade. And so they're your two guardians. Palisade,
one is a harpist and one is a singer, I believe.
Sort of, yeah. So I think C Psalmist is the singer, and she's responsible for teaching you about your task, your role in the world as the nano cleaner. And then Palisade is she's the emotional mommy. She's there to teach you or to caretake your emotional needs in order to ensure that you're able to carry out your nano cleaner tasks without interruption, essentially. And so you have once you finally hatch out of your egg, and I should also say that part of the hatching process that becomes very important later on is that in order to hatch, you have to collect some things in order to get a Glandilock seed. And the Glandilock seed is a part of the center itself. The center is the kind of, god of this world, or the sort of central being of the world.
Everything is made in the shadow of the center.
Exactly.
I guess it's your third mommy.
Yes, exactly. And
so many mommies.
And so the center places the Glandilock seed into your head, and that allows you that I think gives you your powers, or otherwise lets you control them or something like that. It's sort of your direct connection to the power of the center. And so all of that is to say that once you've had all of this sort of tutorial, you're now set loose in the world of New Theland, which is the land that the center has created. And New Theland is a weird world populated by weird characters. Lots of them are, just the the like strangest 3D models you've ever seen wandering around in this sort of kind of weird hub and spoke shaped city. And your goal is to just sort of explore and talk to everyone that you can and find out if anyone needs nano cleaning, if they need cleaning of their dust, and start cleaning the dust out of their brains.
I definitely like that the name of the place is, you pronounce it Theland, but it's also just the land, like you also said. And
yeah, that's what I was thinking, the land.
Yeah. I suppose that's more like it. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking it was kind of rhyme with like Zealand.
Like New Zealand.
Exactly.
No, I think it's like if a robot, God was making the land, what would it be called? Oh,
The land.
the land.
Yep, New the Land.
The land, yeah. What came before New the Land?
New the land final ... doc.
Yeah.
I want to talk about something real quick, which I feel like I don't know how to put this exactly, but the thing that I want to stress about this is that like this, at least at the very start of the game, feels like an absolute onslaught of random nonsense, and it can feel a little bit like it's just throwing almost nonsensical like world building that's designed to not make sense at you en masse. And it can feel a little bit at the start like, well, this just indicates that they're kind of being, I don't know, random for its own sake, or trying to dazzle me with their weirdness or something. And initially I thought that was going to kind of turn me off, but they really carry this through. And so I don't want to talk too much about this stuff in terms of the like, I don't want to get into spoilers, at least not at this point. We might have a spoiler break towards the end of the show where we talk about some of the mid and end game details. But I do want to say that like the developers care about this world, as weird as it is, as full of strange stuff as it is. The developers really care about the characters and world that they're setting up here, and they have gone to great lengths to like set up something that may be weird but has a certain internal consistency, and even stuff that seems like a one-off random thing at the beginning of the game often has some weird payoff towards the end of the game.
Yeah, it's a great call out, Raygan. I think the way they accomplish this is there's definitely a lot of silly randomness that's played for humor. And while it may pay off or not later, like I do believe the intent is to like build a world of a little bit of wackiness and a little bit of silliness, but they also balance it with a lot of stuff that is almost incoherently self-serious, right? That you can tell that like they have a deep concept of the lore and like the purpose of this world in this game, that like your understanding of it builds and builds and builds. But there are times where you're just reading and it's like, I have no idea what this is talking about, but I can tell that like whoever wrote it definitely has. So for example, I'm going to read a screen grab that I got from C Psalmist, who is talking at one point in the game. And this is, I think, an example of the sort of seriousness that they also add into this game. So it says, C Psalmist sings, "Blessed are they who walk along the path of their creation, who radiate cleanliness from the center as light is cast from a flame. The fool says, I am the center. They are like an arrogant flower, sprouting early to mock the winter's cold. The wicked shall wither before they blossom, their machinations crumbling to dust. But the righteous bloom in season. The work of their hands is blessed. Their radiance is a joy to the ones they love, their leaves a comfort and a shade." So that just gets dropped right in the middle of like a weird little worm guy who like wants to have a football or something, you know, like
Charlie Brown joke. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like, so there's these scenes where you're just like, I could take that and digest and really break apart all of it. But that's like over half the writing is that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's like, you don't even really, I don't know. In my experience, I wasn't breaking it down, and I wasn't really earnestly trying to understand what Seed Psalmist was saying in that, but it was building a world where it's like, there's clearly something that is like meaningful going on here, and I'm going to learn it through the story, and I'm going to learn it as I play. And I think that added that balance that made all of the wackiness at least feel more purposeful and thought about than just like, oh boy, like, you know, fuzzy penguins are strange, right? Or whatever our, you know, random stuff would be.
Yeah, the writing in the game is really something. I mean, they just have this magical ability to switch between like absurdity and poetry and let you kind of live in both. And it's just so, I don't know, that's a perfect example, Nate, of like a moment where it just interjects some little element of like truly poetic writing that stands out all the more because it's stuck in a moment when people are being silly and things are being strange and bizarre. And I mean, there were tons of those in this game. I took a bunch of screenshots too, and I'm not just going to sit here and read them. I have some of them that I think are probably spoilers anyway, so I'll keep them to myself. But like, there were tons of times in this game where I was like, wow, that's a great turn of phrase or great little bit of writing. And it's really sort of almost reinforcing itself by occasionally being silly. It's really something.
I think it's the writing in this game and the other games that I've played of them, particularly, you know, even the Ocean. It's the writing that sets these games apart because the overworld is cool and interesting and strange, and the 2D dungeon crawling is fun and simple
and way better. I mean, we can come to it later, but way better in this game than in Anodyne 1. Like the dungeon design is good here.
It's very concise, at least as far as I get. Very concise and very effective and fun. But like, other than the fact that this game switches between genres a ton, it's really the world and the writing that made it feel so unique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that I was talking with my husband about it, and he was saying that it's because it has that self-serious tone and it's so clever. It's not necessarily a game that you are giggling at like Wonder Song or necessarily laughing out loud at like Night in the Woods. There's a lot of things that you're like for me, the stuff I really laughed at were like the unexpected changes, like when a character named Ray Boat Shoes shows up. Or,
by the way, changing my Twitter bio to Ray Boat Shoes.
As you
I know, right?
Very well should. And every time you go into one of the dungeons, they have a joke pun title. For example, one of them says Infernal Bleeding.
Okay.
That's the kind, or you walk around and you look up on the wall and there's a piece of graffiti that says environmental storytelling. Like, if you think that stuff is funny, this is a game for you. If you think that stuff is just clever and it doesn't tickle you, like, maybe it's not right. But if it hits you hard.
So I think it's kind of hard to get a feeling for like what this game is actually like without talking about some specific examples. And I think it might be worth talking through maybe a couple of the early game kind of quote unquote dungeons, some of the people that you encounter and what happens when you nano clean them. The very first one that I ran into was, so you get out of the center, which is sort of the center spoke of this island. And you're let loose in the city center, which is sort of like a little mini city full of little 3D characters. And the very first thing that I did was sort of like wander around looking for, I don't know, buildings. And I wandered into the house of Mysteria Wazel. And the house is this sort of weird, ominous sci-fi cube-looking thing. And there's this horrible baby standing outside saying that he's been hearing weird noises coming from inside. God, some of the characters in this are just like unsettling, like the weird gigantic baby. And so I go into the house, and inside it's full of lamps, like thousands of lamps. And inside is Mysteria Wazel, a character who is obsessed with lampshades, and she's got a collection of literally thousands of lampshades in there. And so you something's wrong with her. She's I forget exactly what her how it describes her sort of mental issue, but basically I think she's sort of a shut-in and a hoarder, and you can zap her with your spark. This is your kind of way of shrinking inside of somebody, and now you're suddenly in the interior life, in the brain of Mysteria Wazel, and you're trying to, I don't know, cure her of her dust. And
a quick second before you get into that, you play a rhythm game.
Right. Let's talk about the dimension dive minigame that you do every time you're going into somebody's brain.
Yeah, well, I mentioned earlier that this game definitely plays with a lot of different genres. The most notably that we've already discussed is the 2D and 3D, worlds. But what good game doesn't have a rhythm minigame in it, right?
There are two parts of this that I really love. One is I'm a sucker for a rhythm game, and it's just pointing your joystick if you're playing with a controller in the right direction. So it's something simple. It gets you in this nice groove. You feel like you're moving forward. It's kind of like a combat at an angle where things are coming at you. You're pointing in the right direction, like a much easier Guitar Hero, for example. And then if you get past that little thing, you have reached the person you're diving into their brain, and you hit this excellent animation where you do almost like a balletic soar into the air, and you spin around and you slowly spin into their brain. It's just one of the best little transition sequences, at least to me, that I've seen in a while, because it takes you from 2D to 3D, and it doesn't feel like it's just an animation. You actually get to do something. It feels like an effort to get in someone's head, which is something I appreciated quite a bit.
Yeah,
and it
I love
more
that.
And more complicated,
Yeah, if you watch the trailer for this, they have a couple of shots of that, and it was sort of one of the more standout, like, visual, cool moments. And it
just feels like an event rather than a button press.
Yeah, and it's also like, it's a moment where, like, it really isolates your character model and the character model of the person that you're about to, brain dive. And like, it does different lighting than in the general overworld, and it just gives you a moment to really, like, look at this, I guess, person that you're going inside of. And I agree, it's just a really, really good transition.
And I'm not like a huge fan of rhythm games, particularly this style of, like, you hit left when it tells you to hit left, you hit right when it tells you to hit right. But that it's about to happen, and the amount of time that you have to do it is very short. So I actually really enjoyed this.
Yeah, it's a pretty small piece of the game, but it's a really nice little transition to make.
Yeah, it was a fun little break.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you're in the actual dungeon. And I'm not going to go through any specific examples here, but I will say that the way that the dungeons are designed are small, manageable dungeons, which is, I think, very good, because there are a lot of... I sort of prefer, like, a larger number of smaller dungeons. This is sort of how I feel about the like Breath of the Wild. Like, I prefer the design of Breath of the Wild with, like, literally hundreds of tiny little micro dungeons versus, an overworld with 7 massive brain killer dungeons. And that's sort of what this game does. Each time you go into somebody's head, it's a micro dungeon is kind of what I'd describe them as. There are these, fairly modest. They all have a map. They all, that auto maps for you. There's never any, like, ultra complicated multi-level business going on here. It's all 2D. And but they also usually have a kind of a central gimmick that you're playing with. They introduce some new type of enemy or new type of hazard, and they have little challenges that build on each other. I think this is just straight up good level design, and they did a pretty good job with this in Anodyne 1, but this, I think the sort of general dungeon design here is so much more pleasing than it was in Anodyne 1.
And just like any dungeon crawler, you want a dungeon that is definitely heavily big tongue based, right? You want a big long tongue that you use to lick a bunch of different stuff, and you really want to have an NPC in there that, like, really enjoys being licked by this giant tongue.
Not okay with that. Just even you mentioning it is making me, like, you guys can't see me, but I literally, my shoulders are by my ears, and I'm the thought of that weird tongue skin creature licking everything is just making my skin crawl.
Disagree entirely. That is when the
I
game.
cannot handle it emotionally. Or
Being licked by giant tongues is a really, really divisive topic, and I don't think it's the subject of our podcast. I think we're going to have some listeners who would like nothing more than to be licked by a giant tongue. But I think maybe 50% of our listeners are going to really not like the idea of a big, slobbery, wet, meaty tongue.
Is it
The
slobbery?
size of a refrigerator.
Covered in warty, horrible tongue taste buds.
Shut it down.
It's definitely warty. Whether it's wet and slobbery, you can't tell because
Listeners, there's going to be a new tier on our Patreon, and if you back at the $25 a month level, you can join the special channel on our Discord where we
Where you torture me.
details. It's going to be a fully immersive RP about being licked by a giant tongue, and Shane's going to DM
And if
it.
there's any listeners like me, they have turned off this podcast and run for the hills.
Listeners, delete your subscription. This podcast is being shut down forever.
if you're a current member of the Discord, you can upgrade to $30 to have yourself removed from that Discord. Because otherwise, here it comes.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So yeah, like we don't need to go into a whole lot of detail here about the specifics of the.
We just did.
We decided to talk about the dungeon and not the like toxic masculinity or like the beautiful
tongue-gin.
story about a man surviving his family. Like
Yeah.
no, we go straight to the tongue content.
Yeah, well, that's what
Guys.
we're all about on this podcast.
Disappointed.
Tongue content.
We know what the people want.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, there's very good dungeons, and we can probably leave it at that. Now. But I will say that like the world slowly expands, so obviously you'll explore the city and collect all of the dust out of the brains of the various citizens, and you'll collect cards. And the sort of back and forth of the game is you'll collect cards to upgrade the dust prism, which is where you store all of your dust, and then you'll fill up that dust prism with dust. And the fuller and larger that prism gets, the more that it unlocks other areas of the world for you in a kind of an expanding radius of world. So once you fully expand that, you get quite a lot of world to explore with quite a lot of characters, all of which have their own little mini dungeons inside of them. And it continues to surprise with new dungeon ideas and also larger and more interesting and varied areas of the overworld and the 3D area. And I found exploring this game to be like a real treat. I really liked it a lot.
To me, this is what made this a good short game. And that was not because I finished it, because I didn't, but it was because I wanted to parcel this game out. This game has, we've talked about this really rich, detailed language, this really surrealist bent. It's got all this imagery, and like those kind of specialty directors we keep name dropping, I wanted the world to stay special. And so when I started looking at something that was quirky and delightful and weird and just kind of accepting it as the norm, I would finish the dungeon, I would go drop off my dust and canisters, I would stop. And the game is beautifully gated that every couple dungeons you fill up your tank, you fill up your cards, you go to the center and you get to say, do I want to keep going? And if you are in a receptive mood, you can. But if you've had your fill, you can stop. And for me, I really like a game that lets me gobble or lets me snack. I don't like it when the game forces me to marathon it. This game is really nicely, there's a ton of checkpoints. There are tons of times, little dungeons you can go in and out of. And I like a game you can quit easily if it's got a very specific taste, because I will want to be there for an hour and immerse myself and then step back. And I appreciate that very much about this game. It is weird to praise a game for letting me quit it, but honestly, I value that so much.
Totally. I don't want to get into a spoiler territory quite yet, but I will say that this game continues to surprise right until the end, and it does that sometimes by shifting up this sort of gameplay that it's offering. So I don't think we need to get into this just yet, but I will say that like there's a big mid-game surprise shift, I would say sort of twist, that I thought was extremely exciting and interesting. And then even very near the late game, there are some moments where the game becomes an entirely different sort of game with different gameplay and even totally different graphics and characters and style, and just really big shifts where it's clear these like developers had ideas that they couldn't quite squeeze into Anodyne 2 as is, and decided to throw some other kitchen sink stuff in there just for flavor and weirdness. So this game is like full of surprises, A to Z, totally surprising. And Laura said she hadn't finished the game. I finished it this afternoon. It is about 10 hours, which I think is a sweet spot for us. And I thought it was like 100% full of surprises right to the very end. And I had an absolutely wonderful time with it.
We've done a lot of games for this show, and a lot of times we can sort of tie it like, oh, this is like a stew of, these other games, right? And then every once in a while we come across a game that maybe lives in a gameplay mechanic that we're all familiar with, like in this one, a 2D dungeon or a 3D platformer, but feels unlike any of the other games that you've ever played that exist in that genre. This is one of those games. Between the writing and the world building and some of the gameplay, it is just a really unique experience. And I think a credit to the developers that they continue to manage to do this. They continue to put out these games that are very much their own thing.
Yeah, totally.
So I mentioned it earlier, and it's Chekhov's turn into a car, and we can't not at least complete that discussion. And it is, I think, a great quality of life choice that they added to this game that just continues to add to the overall insanity. And so
I think it would enhance my quality of life just dramatically if I could turn into a car.
now, is it you turn into a car, or are you inside of the car?
Oh no, you definitely turn into a car. So the way that it describes it in the context of the game is, Nova, the nano cleaner, has her normal scale, and then she can also shrink to nanoscale, but then she can scale up to ride scale. So she's definitely turning into the car.
She is the car. It's great. So the 3D world is big, and if you were like me and you played the MMO games, you just had to walk these distances, and sometimes a lot of the game would be like, all right, we got to travel this far, and it's just like, all right, I'm gonna hold shift, which makes me run, and I'm gonna spend 10 minutes running across this plane. In this game, you get to turn into a car, and if only I had that. If only that existed in EverQuest. But I don't know about you guys, but for the life of me, I was horrible at driving the car, though. It was thing can turn on a dime, and that meant that at least with my DS4 plugged in my computer, I was whipping all over the place. Hard to drive in a straight line, but it was very, very convenient to just be oh, I need to go over there. I don't have to run, and just turn into a car and zoom over there and turn back into a normal. Normal's not the right word, but turn back into Nova.
I really appreciated that it was fast to turn into the car and turn back. It sort of is what the game does instead of giving you a run button. And yeah. I loved it. It was it does change the way that it controls. It's not quite the sort of full 360 point in any direction and go of walking around as Nova. But once you turn into that car, you can really zoom. And the game world, the overworld in the 3D sort of mode of the game, has little highways that kind of go from area to area. And so that really made it fun to you'd kind of get up onto the highway and zip along to a new area. And then once you got there, you'd take an off ramp sort of and kind of explore around the off-road area of each zone.
Yeah.
And I just liked that structure a lot. I enjoyed being a car.
Yeah. There was also a car wash. And its flaps actually moved as you went through them, which was okay, this game has slightly better graphics and like computations than most of the games from the era that it is imitating.
Oh yeah,
because
on the Saturn they would have spent their whole budget on those little car wash flaps.
Yeah, you would have just gone, you clip right through them and it'd be like, oh, all right,
Totally.
Yeah.
I really liked that about it. I also, there was, in the 3D world of the game, I mean, we're not talking too much about the 2D stuff because it is basically little mini versions of Anodyne 1, but the Anodyne 2 stuff, the 3D world is all new. I was really taken aback by how much I loved the look and architecture of some of the structures in the 3D world in this game. I took a bunch of screenshots as I was playing through it because every now and then you just turn a corner and there's some just absolutely magnificent shot or weird thing. The game does a little bit of this thing that like PS1 era games often did, where it was 3D and very often the camera is sort of pinned behind or pinned behind Nova or controlled with an analog stick. But sometimes you walk into an area where there's a particularly striking thing to look at and the camera switches to a sort of a fixed perspective. And sometimes those things were like really, really dramatic and cool. There's this one area that I'm probably not going to do it justice by describing it, but you go down into a drain at the bottom of a lake and you find yourself in a massive fish tank. And at the end of the fish tank is a sort of a sphere of roots sticking up out of the one end of the fish tank. And inside of that is a kind of a clubhouse full of tree enthusiasts. And I mean, that's a weird thing to describe, but like, it's so striking looking. It's so cool looking. And then there's other like just random little bits of architecture. There's a moment where you come around a corner and there is a house shaped like a dinosaur, or is it a dinosaur shaped like a house? And it's moving around and you can't go inside of it. You can't even really interact with it. It's just there, and it looks cool.
Oh man, I tried so hard to jump in that.
Oh, me too.
To jump on the guy's, the dinosaur house lowers its neck down, and I kept trying to jump in its mouth or jump on its head and get up to failed every time.
Yeah,
I had a lot of fun failing.
Fortunately, it's not. It's mostly decorative. Like the dinosaur house is just there for flavor. There was some really cool sort of 60s looking like pods on stilts with weird floating steps up to them, that kind of thing. And just like the architecture of this stuff, I was just very impressed with the visuals. And given that this is the first 3D game from these people, I was pretty astonished at how cool a lot of the 3D spaces were. So I wanted to just sort of call that out because I was super impressed with it. So this game is pretty unique, and I definitely recommend it. I really, really enjoyed it, much more than I did Anodyne 1, and I liked Anodyne 1. This is a huge, I guess, like evolution on that game. So I 100% recommend this game to folks. It is out right now on PC and Mac. It's on Steam and itch.io, and I can't recommend it enough. I played it on Mac and it worked just fine, and it plays on, I think it'll play on pretty much any computer you decide to throw it at, and also worked great with a DualShock 4 in my case, just plugged in, so go for it.
And it is not processor intensive because I played it while burning a disc accidentally and it still worked.
You burned a disc accidentally?
No, I burned a disc. I thought I had paused it, but it was still processing the conversion. And normally I don't try to do two processor intensive things at the same time. It's a way to crash games. It went fine.
You were burning. Follow-up question. You were burning a disc?
In 2019?
From a disc.
Oh, okay.
I see. Well, you're right. Yeah, it is a fairly, I think one of the benefits of going for this retro aesthetic is that it is not particularly processor intensive, apparently. And it definitely ran really, really well on my iMac, but I get the feeling this would run on practically anything, which is a plus. I was actually a little worried about that, but it ran great. And you can find this. I mentioned that you can find this game on itch or on Steam. It is $19.99, and I 100% recommend it at that price. I think it took me almost exactly 10 hours to complete. There is an in-game clock, and it's exactly on the nose at 10 hours for me right now. And I played to the bad ending and then reloaded a save and played to the good ending, and that was exactly 10 hours. So, highly recommended. We are going to have a spoiler break after our conclusion here. So if you are interested in listening to us chat about some of the late game developments and surprises, you can stick around for that. Before I'll start with what's making us happy this week. So Laura, what's making you happy this week?
So I got two things. I'm going to cheat. One is that Chicory is on Kickstarter, and I was able to play the demo. For people who aren't familiar, it is a game from the creator of Wonder Song, and it's also got music from the composer from Celeste. So those two things, plus the fact that it is a drawing dog named Pizza as the main character, all of those things are delightful. The demo is great. Highly recommend you check out that Kickstarter. Since that's not something anyone else can play, I also want to give something else. I recommend the show Glow Season 3. It was very entertaining. They're stuck in Vegas. If you've watched the other shows, seasons, they're stuck in Vegas, but they get to delve into the characters a lot more since they're kind of stuck in one place. It's very wonderful.
I can't wait to watch that. I really liked season 1 and 2, and I've kind of got such a backlog of TV. Every time you guys recommend a TV show in this segment, I kind of add it to my backlog. I'm still working through Stranger Things season 3 that Nate mentioned in What's Making Us Happy This Week like 2 weeks ago. But now I definitely need to make time to do season 3 of Glow, because I just really liked season 1 and 2, especially season 1. But I just can't wait to go back to it.
And half-hour episodes.
Right. When
That's
do you get that
call.
Anymore?
I know. I haven't watched any of Glow, but that is one of the best endorsements I've heard of the show. I'm a huge fan of Alison Brie from Community.
She rules.
And she's Mad Men too, but Community is where I know her best from.
If you want to see her play an anti-hero, check out Glee.
Check out
Glow, not Glee.
Sorry, not Glee. Glow.
Different show.
Yeah, it's like, wait.
You're like, wait, she's in Glee? No, Alison Brie is not in Glee. Definitely not.
Nate, what's making you happy this week?
So this coming weekend, I'm going camping for the first time in like 15 years.
Ooh.
So
Cool.
I'm looking forward to that. So what's making me happy is preparing for a truly Midwestern experience of going camping, float trip, and then camping. So I am looking forward to it. I enjoy the outdoors, and I go out and like run and hike and things like that, but a pure like stay in a tent I've not done for a very long time. So I'm gonna have my Nintendo Switch. I'm gonna play a ton of Slay the Spire. It's gonna be great. Gonna be finally some peace and quiet. No, I'm looking forward to it.
Mr. Natural over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
That's awesome.
So that's making me happy. The planning for that.
I have a sort of similarly like not specific recommendation. What's making me happy this week? My week has been characterized by the fact that my wife is out of town and I've been sort of solo dadding this week. And so the thing that's making me most happy is that that's almost done, and I've managed to keep my daughter alive the entire time.
Hey,
yes,
you did it.
I did it.
Yay.
You did it. You're done. You're done. There's no more parenting.
None. I've finished all of the parenting. I'm done with it.
Yep.
I will also say, just as a brief aside, and I kind of feel like I'm repeating myself because I brought this up on What's Making Us Happy this week multiple times, but in the minimal amount of spare time I've had between all of the solo dad stuff and the playing of Anodyne 2, I've also been playing a lot more of various games on the Neo Geo, and I've had a ton of fun with I've modded an arcade stick this week for the Neo Geo. I finally got the parts in for that and had a lot of fun just sort of doing, swapping buttons and getting the color scheme just the way that I like it and all of that. I mean, it's been a lot of fun to sort of like buy different models of joystick and compare the clickiness of them. I mean, it's the kind of fussiness that I really enjoy, that sort of like how many different ways can you customize this extraordinarily basic piece of technology? And so buying and customizing different joystick parts has been like a nice sort of calming little project that I've had to do, in downtime once Wednesday's been asleep. So I recommend that if you have a reason to have a joystick, why not customize it? And also, I recommend keeping your 7-month-old baby alive. That's a good, a good thing to do. Shane, what's making you happy this week?
Oh my gosh. So those of you who know me have probably heard me talk before about No Man's Sky, because this is a game that I continue to go back to over and over and over again. I don't know what it is about this game, but for me, it scratches very much the same itch that had me playing Minecraft for many years. This is, of course, they're both survival games, but so they're both games where very very little is asked of you in terms of just like, okay, stay alive, but if you don't, go back and get your stuff and try and figure out your own goals and grow from there. But No Man's Sky has continued to kind of grow through all these expansions, and now they've had the Beyond expansion. Or wait, no. Whatever, this is 2.0, whatever. They incremented the version number. I can't remember the name they gave it. But in this new expansion, they have brought together two things that I already loved. One is PlayStation VR, and the other is No Man's Sky and survival gameplay. And being able to go back to this game yet again and continue to see it improve in tons and tons of different ways, and then being able to do that all in virtual reality makes this thing that I already loved just so much more immersive. And this is a game that's so much about your presence and your experience of just being in these unusual places, that being able to actually feel like you really are in these places. And, when you see the giant Stegosaurus hippopotamus with the head of a hippo and the spines of a Stegosaurus, and it's like thundering towards you, and it's 3 times your height, and it's like right there, and that is so awesome and so immersive. And then when you're able to just like, okay, I'm exploring around, I pull out my gun and my multi-tool, and I start collecting resources, and I'm deforming the terrain and like burning down trees and collecting their carbon and all of this stuff with that first-person view, with this very accurate pointing device in your hand. Like, you're just cruising around and vacuuming up all of these resources. That's the aspect of the game that, for me, it was a very zen kind of podcast game activity, is just collecting resources, building bases, exploring, scanning, and oh my gosh, flying. And all of those things are things that are just kind of cool things for me to just do while I maybe have something on in the background. I can chill, and it's a relaxing game, and you always feel like you're growing your base or making progress or getting closer to the next Atlas station or whatever. And that's what I love about survival games. Building. I don't love a huge degree of difficulty. I like to kind of grow and achieve my own goals and gather resources and use them to do things that I choose. But all of that it brought into this new experience. It's really compelling. And the thing is, I've had some play sessions of this that lasted way longer than any other VR game I've ever played, which probably the next runner-up would be Tetris Effect, where I've definitely had some evenings where I put in a lot of hours on that. But I've had times with this No Man's Sky VR where I just put the headset on, and it's nighttime, and I take the headset off and I look at the clock, and like hours and hours have gone by, and I wasn't feeling sick, and I was just like, I'd just been playing the game as I always have. The controls in VR definitely take a lot of getting used to.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Does this use a DS4 or does it use the wands, the move controllers?
You can use either one, and I've tried it with both because I don't love the move controllers.
Mhm.
I actually found myself using the move controllers for this, so maybe I'm gonna have to eat my words because I'm using these much loathed move controllers. The feeling of using the multi-tool with the move controllers, and you use the other multi-tool to kind of teleport around. I really like the teleport movement in this. That's really good. Like the multi-tool. To tell you a little bit about your controls with the move controllers. You basically have hands in this virtual world, which is what you always want when you're using this kind of control. But on the back of each of your hands, you have these little glowing dots. And if you point to them with the finger of the other hand, like if you bring your hands together, it extends this pointer finger and also like a selection circle that's very much like the menu circles that you use in this game. And the menu basically pops up as a hologram off of the back of your hand or off of the back of the multi-tool. And you have full access to all of the menus in the game, and they all either appear as the like quick menu on the back of your hand or as a big floating menu in front of you, kind of projected diegetically in the world as like a hovering hologram. And so even though this is a game that is a little bit menu heavy, that doesn't feel wrong in VR. And even stuff like crafting worked for me in VR. I didn't have to. I didn't feel like it was a drag. A lot of that is helped by some of the quality of life improvements that they've made in this version. Like they have all but eliminated the limitation on the size of a stack of any given particular resource. That's not really the biggest limitation in the game, which is like the number of resource slots that you have, but it's a huge improvement over what was a little bit of a fiddly, what still is, I guess, a little bit of a fiddly resource management setup. But being able to just say, okay, I'm just going to get all the trees on this entire valley until I have a stack of carbon the size of like a skyscraper.
Deforestation.
I just teleport around and use my laser to burn all the trees and steal all the carbon. Or the same thing for rocks. And a lot of that stuff where, you were doing a lot of management of like inventory space is made a whole hell of a lot easier. In terms of controls, No Man's Sky is a game that has tons and tons of different control schemes. You have one control scheme when you're on foot. You have another control scheme when you're in a ship. You have another control scheme if you're in a car or a submarine. You have in all of those, there's lots of things that you can do and menus that you can pull up, and there's quick menus and there's full menus, and so there's a lot going on. There's a crafting interface. So all of that is a lot to bring into virtual reality successfully, and I was very surprised to feel that they did. The most challenging part of virtual reality control-wise is the core flying gameplay. They give you hands in the cockpit to grab kind of a throttle and a virtual flight stick. But when you've grabbed the flight stick, you kind of have to change your mentality on it, because you're basically clicking your hand around this flight stick, and now it's not so much like you control the hand grabbing the flight stick. It's more like the stick in your hand kind of is the flight stick. And for me, it works best if I kind of then rest it on my knee, but it's not perfect. So then my knee then kind of still has to be in a perfect place, which is its whole own thing. So they could improve on that a little bit. I really want them to add something that a lot of these VR games have, which is an adjustable floor height. I felt like the floor height while in the cockpit was a little bit low. I wanted to snuggle a little closer down in the seat, which would have made the controls a little bit more reachable for me. As it was, I was reaching down past my knees to grab certain things, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, like, so my love of this game continues to grow. I think it's a great time for anyone who has PSVR or who does not to pick up this game, because not mentioned for me. I mean, I'm obviously talking a lot about the VR, but they continue to make real game-changing updates and improvements. There's a full, huge multiplayer element to the game now. They continue to add little immersive elements, like, you know, they have made it so that now the NPCs do a lot more. Do a lot more in the world. You'll see them out walking around in the world. They'll get in and out of their ships, go and do trading. You can go and talk to them wherever they might be. They and you can basically sit in chairs and stuff like that. They've also done more.
Finally.
Yeah, it actually is kind of one of those things where people are like, "Oh, finally, I can sit in chairs." I'm like, "Okay," but if that makes the game more immersive for you, that's great.
Yeah, I have like 5-hour saves on this game.
This is also a great time to restart the game. They've reworked the intro. So if you've played that intro a few times, you know that every time they've done one of these big updates, they've changed and refined and tweaked the initial quest that like introduces you to elements of the game. And they've done that again, and it's a big improvement. So I ran through it once on a new save just to see before going back to my old save.
Yeah, I need to do that. When I say I have like 5-hour saves, like that definitely means that I've started games and restarted, and I've actually enjoyed it like every time. I've had this game since day one and have followed it just like you for all the ups and downs of the game, and I have a lot of respect for the game company. Was Hello Games, that they have like stayed committed and continue to make it better and better and better. I don't have a VR headset. I've been considering buying one. I played some Super Hot again the other day with a friend's VR. And between that and this, I am starting to finally think, is it time for me to buy a VR headset?
Hey, keep an eye out, man. They go on sale pretty frequently, or you can pick up a used one if you're comfortable with like wiping it off. And they're not expensive anymore. Like the PSVR is like like you can get a PSVR setup for, I think, like I've seen them on sale brand new for $250, and you can probably get them even less than that if you want.
Yeah, I will at some point. Super Hot is the most innovative shooter I've played in years, and playing it on VR is wonderful. And I think this game sounds great on it. It's cool that they pulled it off. And I think when you think about like what VR would be, like what would it be cool to have in VR? I think this is definitely sort of what you've always had in mind, like exploring galaxies, right?
Totally.
And I think if they've found a way to make it immersive with the technology as it is today, then that is the most compelling argument for VR that I've heard so far. So
awesome. I'm so glad to hear that it's continued to improve and that the PSVR version is as good as you say. It's very exciting.
It's not short, though.
Yeah, that's true. And neither was this discussion of it, but that's okay. Let's move on to some admin outro, and then we'll talk about spoiler stuff for Anodyne 2. So, first of all, listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. If you didn't know, and how did you miss it at the beginning of the show, we are supported by our listeners on Patreon. Patreon is a wonderful platform. I mean, it's got its issues, but hey, we like it, and we are happy to have the support of our listeners. And if you want to join all of our listeners who are supporting us, you can go to patreon.com/theshortgame, or go to theshortgame.net, and you can click on the Patreon link at the top of the page. And you can support us even at $1 a month. You get access to our Discord, which is a great way to chit-chat with us about the short games that we're playing, or with Shane about No Man's Sky. And we also have some channels there where we talk about other games that we're playing, other stuff that's going on. And as I mentioned earlier, we are planning Crab Week. Come talk with us about crabs.
We finally have found the compelling argument for our Discord.
Yes, absolutely. So come join in as we plan Crab Week. We're looking for the best video game crabs. If you want to find us on the web, you can find us at _shortgame on Twitter, or you can find our website at www.theshortgame.net. We've also got a contact form there, which is a great way to drop us a line if you have suggestions about short games that we should be covering. You can find me on Twitter at Raygan K. That's RayGanK. Laura, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
Nate, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at NateSTL. And also, a couple episodes ago, I put out a call to action, a call to arms, if you will. We were sitting at 68 reviews on iTunes, and clearly there was a big time incentive to get that next one. And I have to say, listeners, you really took the call and pushed us up to 71.
You're telling me we skipped right over 69.
We skipped right. I don't know who did it. It doesn't
nice.
It doesn't give me timestamps to the specific degree. But I have some shout outs, and something that is really, really cool is that we got a review from a listener in South Africa.
Interesting.
Who goes by the name of 01, and they wrote really, really awesome things, saying a must if you're interested in the impact short games can have. So really, really nice things. We had a listener from the Netherlands by the name of Backer Joe Ree. I probably blew that up, but they said really, really nice things as well. And then we also had on the American side of iTunes, someone by the name of Bendy6364 talking about our episode on Doki Doki Literature Club and recommending a game for us. So we're at 71. I don't know who got number right after 68, but in my heart, all three of you did. So thank you very much for your very kind reviews. We really, really do appreciate it. And next goal, let's hit 75.
Yes.
It's a great way. We have the Patreon, and we appreciate everyone that's part of it, but also understand that that is not realistic for everyone. So another way to support the show is just come and tell us something nice in iTunes. It actually helps us show up better in search results and whatnot.
Yeah, thanks very much to all of you guys. And of course, Shane, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on a randomly generated planet called Waragurf. And also on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And thank you, listeners, for listening to the short game. Here it is, your spoiler break. So there are a few things that I wanted to talk about this game that are definitely spoilers. So here we are past the spoiler break. I wanted to talk about specifically, there's a sort of a big mid-game twist that I thought was really effective from a storytelling perspective. And then there were some really clever gameplay things that happened a little later that I was also wanted to talk about because I thought they were really clever and cool. So first off, about midway through this game, there is you get sort of sent through a variety of weird twists and turns in the story, you find yourself in what's called the Dustbound Village, which is the game has been setting up very much that you are an instrument of the center, and your job is to destroy the dust. And of course, that has this sort of vaguely ominous tone to it. And of course, you eventually meet some people who are outside of that system. And the Dustbound are a group of people who live outside of the center's light. And so, of course, unlike you, who are, filled with the purpose of the center and don't need to, for example, eat or sleep, they do. They eat, they sleep, they grow old, they die. You wander into their village as they're sort of celebrating or commemorating a funeral. The contrast is really, really something. And it's also, the thing that I love most about this is that there is a moment where, you wander into this village and these people are talking to you. And up to this point, it didn't even occur to me, of course, this character, Nova, is a silent protagonist. But they start talking to Nova, and Nova, it does some things with Nova's inner monologue, which you've seen before as text printed on screen. But Nova is realizing that she doesn't know how to talk. And then she has to learn how to talk because she has to talk to these dustbound people. I just thought that was and then from that point forward, she's no longer a silent protagonist. She has a voice. And I thought that was such a cool transition. It was really a great moment. And it's the whole idea of these, encountering these people and they teach Nova to speak and is great. And I just, this whole section of the game is just like truly like really really good. I really really thought it was like great writing, great story beats, some really clever sort of gameplay loops where Nova is interacting with the Dustbound, and that means she has to do things like help them with their farming, participate in their professional wrestling, which is the thing that they do there, and also kind of commemorate like Palisade, her sort of emotional support mommy, via like weird rituals that she performs there. Like it's just a really cool little like moment in the mid game where this sort of there's a whole shift in tone and a whole shift in like just the whole it's really, I don't know, sorry, super cool. Go ahead, Nate. Sorry.
It makes you wonder if the silent protagonist is often they're like stoic. They're just here to save the world. They don't have much to say. They are bent on their convictions. What if it's just that they don't know how to talk?
Yeah. Or that they've been sort of specifically led down a path where talking is not important to Nova's purpose, to the center, right? I just really liked that. And there were a couple other things I wanted to talk about that is sort of late game stuff that I thought was really cool. One is that about 2/3 of the way through the game introduces something called the like MetaCoin framework. I think I'm getting that right. Where it suddenly the world of the game has these coins spread all over the place, and you can collect them and then spend them in the MetaCoin shop. And they're called meta coins because everything you can spend them on is very meta. So you can spend them to activate these sort of meta points at various different places in the world. And when you go to those meta points, it basically works like if you've played a game where they have like an in-game developer commentary, and often they're basically these sort of like little hovering points at various places in the game world that you press on a thing, and like the developer tells you, hey, when we built this section, originally we did it this way, but then that didn't work and we did it another way. This lets you do that during the course of the original flow of the game. And the like developer commentary is sort of in the context of the game. Like it's written from the perspective of the developers, but it's also sort of diegetic. It's hard to explain, but the tone of it is very meta. It's very like telling you about areas, and it's unclear like when it talks about like how an area was created, is it talking about how like Sean Hantani created it, or is it talking about how the center created it? The tone of it is like walking this really interesting line. And it also opens up these areas where you can zap into these areas called unzones, which are kind of like gray box areas where the devs are kind of showing off their like early prototypes for stuff that either made it into the game or maybe didn't make it into the game. And that's all stuff that you can just sort of explore as part of the course of the regular game. I thought that was a really clever way to kind of include that kind of, meta material right within the game, because I know for myself, I don't often engage with that stuff. Once I've completed a game, I'm kind of done. But putting that stuff in as this sort of like, it's kind of part of the game is like a really clever thing.
That's I'm way more likely to engage with something like that if it's a part of the game, but that's really hard to pull off. And I think it is interesting because the creators of this game have already set the tone that they've put themselves in there a little bit, right? By having like a letter to the player at the out of the gates too.
Yeah, they're very willing to just like speak directly to you as a player, and like I really like that about it. And they carry that through like really extensively. There's a lot in this game that is these two specific developers speaking to you as a player, and like the meta system thing is like it's both part of the plot and also just this totally meta way of like talking to you, the player, about how the developers wanted to convey things to you. It's really clever.
Yeah.
I also wanted to call it a couple of other weird sort of late game things that I thought were really cool. And this is serious spoilers. There's this really amazing moment about 3/4 of the way through the game, where you're hunting through this 3D environment, trying to find characters to interact with, and hoping that they are infected with dust so that you can go in and clean them and get a card. And I was at the point where I was like down to like just a handful of cards I needed left to connect. And I'm hunting this area that's sort of a beach. And there's this giant lobster, but it's halfway embedded in a wall in a way that does not look right. It looks like a glitch. So there's this rock face that's like only partially rendered, and this lobster is kind of like partially embedded in it. And I think that looks like a glitch, but I go up to it, I try to talk to it, it can't talk, but you can spark it, meaning you can kind of dive inside it. And it's like this fully glitched area where like, first of all the dungeons have titles, but this one is called like it's called No Such Scene, and the flavor text for it is all lorem ipsum text. And when you get inside it, rather than diving into the standard dungeon, you're in an isometric game where you're playing as this like modern woman who's living alone in an apartment and is contemplating the gargoyle living on the outside of her very modern looking or not modern looking, it's actually kind of a retro looking apartment building, but like in a modern city, not at all related to anything that you've seen in the game previously. And the character's name is Nora. So like you're no longer Nova, you're Nora. And you play out a couple of days in the life of Nora, this like pretty average person who works at a fast food restaurant. And every morning you contemplate this gargoyle on the outside of your apartment, and there's a friend comes to visit you, that kind of thing. And it slowly, over the course of about 20 minutes, turns into a horror game where you start getting these increasingly unsettling, stalkerish texts. And then, of course, it turns out that the texts were from the gargoyle, and the gargoyle chases you around the apartment building and suddenly starts shedding all of its stone shell and becomes this hideous flesh creature. I mean, it's just this like super weird, like glitched out interlude in the game that like comes out of nowhere, has almost no bearing on the rest of the game, and just rewards you with a card once you get through it. And it's like, wow, what was this doing here? And I mean, there's other weird little things in the game too. Like you get the ability to shrink to an even smaller scale than nanoscale, and that becomes used quite a bit. And some of the places where you do that are particularly interesting. Like there's a place in the game where you shrink down into a little like you shrink into a book, and the book is a sort of a fairy tale, and suddenly you're in a Dragon Quest style RPG. Like there's all these little like weird shifts in gameplay style that happen towards the end of the game where they really just sort of feel like they're flexing and showing off like all the cool stuff that they can throw into this game.
They definitely established like, hey, with our format, we can pretty much zap you around in any game style that you want. So let's make a half-hour Dragon Quest or whatever, right? Yeah. And you can just like drop in that, and whether it's fun or not, it doesn't really matter because it's so short.
Yeah,
also,
I loved the sort of bizarre, willing to try anything structure, particularly towards the end of this game. And I won't talk about the ending. I'll say that I got the bad ending first and then went back into my save and got the good ending, and both are worth getting. And I really enjoyed everything about this game, start to finish. So cool. That's pretty much all I have to say about it. There's some really cool stuff towards the end, and check it out.
Yeah, it's a game that is considered top to bottom. Like they definitely the amount of varied experiences and effort put into making a complete experience is pretty impressive.
Yeah,
and I think this is one of the more interesting and cooler games we've done this year.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. This is easily on my game of the year consideration list. Right now. Maybe that's just sort of like recency bias, but I thought it was really cool. Yeah. So, listeners, thank you again for joining us and sticking it out past the spoiler break. Hope to hear from you on the Discord. If you're not supporting the Patreon, that's okay too. Hope to hear from you on Twitter and on our website and all of those sorts of places. Very shortly, we have 2 games coming out that are going to be covered on the show very, very soon. And I think the order coming out very close to each other, so the order is a little bit in the air, but I think the order is we're going to be covering Telling Lies, the follow-up to Her Story by Sam Barlow, and then probably right after that we'll be covering Knights and Bikes, which is a game that I've been looking forward to since its Kickstarter like 3 years ago. So
It's a fantastic title.
yeah, Knights and Bikes is coming up. Telling Lies, the FMV follow-up to Her Story, and after that, we're not 100% sure, so if you have suggestions, now's a great time to let us know. We're planning out our episodes all the way to the end of the year right now. And so, thank you guys so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.